The rain hammered the windshield like bullets against glass, each drop exploding in a burst of reflected neon as Lieutenant Sarah Collins turned the patrol vehicle onto Peachtree Street. Atlanta's skyline loomed ahead, a fortress of steel and light rising through the storm, and somewhere in that vertical maze of concrete and ambition, someone had called for help. The radio crackled with dispatch coordinates, a female voice cutting through the static with mechanical precision. Welfare check at the Meridian Crown Hotel, 8th floor, room adjacent to 807. Possible disturbance. Unusual odor reported, the kind of call that could mean anything from a forgotten takeout meal to something far worse. Sarah glanced in the rearview mirror. Max sat in the back compartment, his dark eyes fixed forward, ears pricked and alert, despite the rhythmic thrum of rain on metal. 7 years in the K-9 unit had taught him to read her moods before she spoke them aloud, and tonight carried a weight neither of them could name. She pulled into the hotel's underground garage, the descent into fluorescent-lit concrete, feeling like a journey into something deliberately hidden from the storm above. The engine's echo bounced off support columns as she parked near the service elevator. Max was out before she opened the rear door fully, his black tactical harness already damp from the brief exposure to rain. He shook once, water droplets catching the harsh overhead lights, then moved to her left side without command. They had done this dance 1,000 times, maybe more, in warehouses and traffic stops and late-night calls that turned sideways without warning. The elevator doors opened with a hydraulic sigh, and Sarah pressed 8. The ascent was smooth, almost too smooth, the kind of mechanical precision that expensive hotels prided themselves on. Soft jazz played from hidden speakers, a surreal contrast to the urgency that had brought them here. The 8th-floor hallway stretched before them like a tunnel, carpet the color of old wine absorbing sound until even their footsteps seemed muted. Wall sconces cast amber light at regular intervals, creating pools of illumination separated by shadows. Room numbers passed in ascending order, brass plates reflecting their approach. 801, 803, 805. Sarah noted the doors all closed, all silent. No sounds of television, no voices, no signs of life at all. The absence felt deliberate, as if the entire floor was holding its breath. Max's gait changed at 8:06. The smooth, confident stride faltered, replaced by something more cautious. His head lowered slightly, nose working the air in rapid inhalations. Sarah's hand moved instinctively to her service weapon, not drawing, but ready. She had learned to trust his reactions before her own mind caught up with whatever triggered them. Room 807 was ahead on the right, its door identical to all the others, except for the number and the fact that Max had stopped moving forward entirely. The Belgian Malinois stood 3 feet from the door, body rigid, muscles coiled beneath tan and black fur. His ears, usually perked and mobile, had flattened against his skull. A low sound emerged from his chest. Not quite a growl, but something deeper, more primal. Sarah had never heard him make that sound before, not in training, not in the field, not ever. She approached slowly, keeping herself between Max and the door, scanning for any obvious threat. No visible damage to the frame, no blood, no signs of forced entry. The peephole was dark, a tiny circle of blackness that revealed nothing. She knocked, 3 sharp raps with her knuckles. The sound seemed to die before it could travel far, absorbed by carpet and walls and the strange silence that had claimed this floor. No response. She knocked again, harder this time, and announced herself. Atlanta PD welfare check. Still nothing. Max backed up 2 steps, then 2 more, his eyes never leaving the door. Every instinct Sarah had developed over years in uniform screamed that something was fundamentally wrong here. But protocol demanded she follow procedure before escalating. She pulled out her radio and contacted dispatch, requested backup and hotel management with a master key. The response came within seconds. Unit en route. Manager notified. ETA 3 minutes. Sarah moved back to stand beside Max, one hand dropping to rest on his harness. His body trembled beneath her touch, a fine vibration that spoke of adrenaline and alarm held barely in check. 3 minutes felt like 30 in that hallway where nothing moved and nothing breathed. The elevator chimed. 2 uniformed officers emerged first, followed by a man in a grey suit whose name tag identified him as night manager. His face carried the professional concern of someone trained to handle difficult situations, but his eyes widened when he saw Max's posture. Sarah gave him a quick briefing. Welfare check, no response. Unusual behavior from the K-9 unit. The manager produced a key card from his jacket pocket, hands steady despite the tension radiating from the scene. Before he could swipe it, Sarah held up one hand. She needed to know what they were walking into, and Max's reaction suggested it was nothing good. She asked the manager about the room's occupant. He pulled out a tablet, fingers moving across the screen with practiced efficiency. Room 807 was registered to a Michael Vance, checked in 4 days ago, paid in cash for a week in advance. No disturbances reported, no requests for service, no phone calls logged. A guest who existed only as a name on a registration form and a stack of bills in the hotel safe. Sarah made the decision. She positioned the 2 officers on either side of the door, weapons drawn but pointed down. She gave Max the command to stay, watching him settle into a crouch 5 feet back, every line of his body communicating reluctance and warning. The manager swiped the keycard. The lock clicked green. Sarah pushed the door open, staying behind the frame for cover. No shots, no sounds, no movement, just a wave of air that carried something chemical and sterile, like disinfectant mixed with electronic components. The room was dark except for a faint blue glow emanating from deeper inside. Sarah announced their presence again, voice cutting through the darkness. Atlanta PD. Come out with your hands visible. Silence answered. She nodded to one officer, who found the light switch near the door. Overhead fixtures blazed to life, illuminating a scene that made no sense at first glance. The hotel room had been completely transformed. The bed was gone, replaced by 3 folding tables arranged in a U-shape. Computer monitors covered every surface, at least a dozen screens showing various feeds and images. The walls, previously neutral hotel beige, were now hidden beneath hundreds of photographs pinned in overlapping layers. Sarah stepped inside, weapon raised, clearing angles. The bathroom was empty. The closet held only a duffel bag and some clothing. The room itself had no occupant. No Michael Vance, no body, no immediate threat. Just this strange nerve center of technology and surveillance that had been assembled in a space designed for travelers and tourists. She holstered her weapon and turned to Max, giving him the okay to enter. The Belgian Malinois approached the threshold and stopped. He would not cross it. His front paws touched the carpet at the door's edge, and he froze, that low sound returning to his chest. Sarah respected his judgment. If Max refused to enter, there was a reason beyond what she could see or smell. She examined the room from the doorway while one officer called for a crime scene unit and the other began documenting with his body camera. The photographs on the walls drew her attention first. She recognized faces, civilians going about their daily lives, people entering buildings, walking dogs, sitting in cafes. But mixed among them were other images. Police officers in uniform, patrol vehicles at traffic stops, the exterior of the precinct building where Sarah reported for duty every morning. Politicians she recognized from local news, business leaders whose faces appeared on billboards downtown. Someone had been watching Atlanta. Not just watching, studying, documenting, creating patterns and profiles of people who had no idea they were under surveillance. Sarah's stomach tightened as she spotted more familiar faces, officers she worked with, her captain, Detective Morrison from Vice, even glimpses of herself, caught in profile as she left the precinct, as she walked Max through Piedmont Park, as she sat in her patrol vehicle at a red light. The realization hit like a physical blow. Whoever had occupied this room had been watching her too. The monitors offered even more disturbing context. Several showed live feeds from cameras positioned around the city. A traffic intersection in Buckhead, the lobby of a government building, the parking garage beneath a financial tower, the entrance to an exclusive restaurant in Midtown. Each feed was labeled with coordinates and timestamps, updating in real time. Sarah moved closer, careful not to disturb anything, her mind racing through the implications. This was not the work of an amateur. The equipment alone represented thousands of dollars. The planning and execution suggested someone with resources and technical expertise. One laptop sat open on the central table, its screen still glowing with activity. Sarah leaned in without touching anything, reading the text displayed in a simple document file. The words were typed in all capitals, centered on an otherwise blank page. Vocês chegaram cedo demais. Then below, in English, you arrived too early. No signature, no explanation, just a message left like a calling card, meant to be found, meant to deliver a specific psychological impact. Sarah felt her jaw tighten. Whoever Michael Vance really was, he had known they were coming, known and left anyway, abandoning this carefully constructed operation with only minutes to spare. The crime scene unit arrived with their cases of equipment and cameras. Sarah stepped back into the hallway, letting them process the room while she tried to organize her thoughts. Max remained where he had stopped, his gaze fixed on the doorway, body still radiating that same barely contained alarm. She knelt beside him, running her hand along his neck, feeling the tension in his muscles. His reaction had likely saved them from something, a trap maybe, a trigger that would have activated if they had entered differently or too quickly. She made a mental note to have the bomb squad sweep the room before anyone went deeper inside. Detective Morrison arrived while the techs were still setting up their lights and markers. He had been pulled from a poker game, if his rumpled shirt and tie said anything. But his expression sharpened as Sarah briefed him on what they had found. His eyes narrowed at the mention of the photographs, especially the ones featuring police personnel. This was not just surveillance. This was intelligence gathering with intent. Either someone was planning something that required detailed knowledge of law enforcement movements, or they were collecting leverage for blackmail and manipulation. Neither option was good. Morrison entered the room with two techs, leaving Sarah in the hallway with Max and growing sense of unease. The hotel manager had been escorted downstairs to pull records and security footage. The two uniformed officers were canvassing other rooms on the floor, knocking on doors and asking if anyone had seen or heard anything unusual. Sarah knew what they would find. Nothing. Guests who had noticed nothing because there had been nothing to notice. Michael Vance, or whoever he really was, had been invisible by design. 20 minutes later, Morrison emerged looking like he had aged a year. He pulled Sarah aside, a voice low enough that only she could hear over the activity in the hallway. The photographs numbered in the hundreds, maybe thousands. Names and locations were written on the backs of many. Cross-references to case files, references to personal information that should have been protected, phone numbers, addresses, family connections. Someone had compiled dossiers on dozens of people, law enforcement and civilian alike, with a level of detail that suggested either inside access or sophisticated hacking. But it was the laptop that had Morrison most concerned. The surveillance feeds were still active, still recording. The system was cloud-based, meaning the data was being stored somewhere remote and redundant. Shutting down the laptop would not stop the surveillance. It would only alert whoever controlled the system that their operation had been discovered. The tech team was working on tracing the network connections, but initial attempts suggested the traffic was routed through multiple proxies and international servers. Whoever built this system had taken serious precautions against being tracked. Sarah listened to Morrison's briefing and felt the weight of it settle over her like a physical burden. This was bigger than a single hotel room, bigger than one suspect. They had stumbled into something that had roots reaching deep into Atlanta's infrastructure, into places that controlled money and power and public trust. The message left on the laptop screen took on new meaning. They had arrived too early, interrupting a plan that was still in motion, still building towards some endgame that remained hidden. Max finally relaxed enough to sit, though his attention never wavered from the doorway. Sarah respected that vigilance. She had learned long ago that his instincts operated on frequencies she could not detect, chemical signatures in the air, subtle sounds beyond human hearing, patterns in behavior and environment that triggered responses hardwired by evolution and training. His refusal to enter the room had been absolute, and looking at what they had found inside, she understood that refusal as a warning about more than just physical danger. The bomb squad arrived an hour into the investigation, bringing their dogs and detection equipment. They swept the room methodically, checking for explosives or chemical triggers, anything that might turn the space into a weapon. They found nothing. No bombs, no tripwires, no booby traps designed to harm the investigators. Yet Max's reaction persisted, even as other K-9 units moved through the room without distress. Sarah watched him carefully. Whatever had triggered his alarm was specific to him, to their partnership, to some recognition that went beyond standard threat detection. Detective Morrison approached her again, this time with a tablet showing security footage from the hotel lobby. The timestamp read 3 hours earlier. A figure in dark clothing and a baseball cap moved through the frame, face angled away from cameras, body language suggesting someone who knew where every lens was positioned and how to avoid them. The person carried a small backpack and nothing else. They crossed the lobby, bypassed the elevators, and disappeared into the stairwell. 10 minutes later, the same figure emerged from a different camera angle, now without the backpack, and exited through a side door into the parking garage. No vehicle was visible on footage, no clear shot of the face, just a phantom who had come and gone like smoke. Morrison scrolled to another clip, this one from 4 days ago. The same figure, or someone dressed identically, entered the hotel through the main entrance, approached the front desk, and registered for room 807. The transaction took less than 3 minutes. Cash payment, minimal conversation. A key card exchanged, and the figure moved to the elevators. The manager confirmed the handwriting on the registration form matched standard procedure, nothing remarkable. No flags, no reasons to question or remember the interaction. Michael Vance, if that was even a real name, had checked in as just another business traveler in a city full of them. Sarah asked Morrison to pull footage from other cameras around the hotel. Traffic cameras, business security systems, anything that might show where the suspect had gone after leaving. He nodded and delegated the task to officers who were already coordinating with the city's traffic management center. It would take hours to compile and review, but it was necessary. Every minute that passed was another minute for Michael Vance to put distance between himself and this room, to disappear into the vast network of highways and cities that spread across the country. The crime scene techs brought out evidence bags filled with hard drives, USB sticks, and memory cards. Everything that could store data was being seized for analysis. The photographs were being carefully removed from the walls, catalogued and packaged. The monitors would be taken to the precinct's tech lab for examination. Morrison estimated it would be weeks before they had a complete picture of what they were dealing with. Sarah understood the timeline but hated it. Weeks meant that whatever Michael Vance had planned could be executed before they even understood the threat. She returned her attention to Max, who had finally laid down but remained alert, head up, eyes tracking every person who moved in the hallway. She knelt beside him and ran her hand along his back, feeling the tension slowly easing from his frame. His reaction had been right. Something about this room, this operation, had triggered every protective instinct he possessed. She trusted that reaction more than any report or analysis. Max had sensed danger in a form she could not measure, and that danger remained even with the suspect gone and the evidence being collected. The hotel manager returned with printed records and a thumb drive containing backup files. Morrison took them immediately, scanning through the documentation. Michael Vance had used a prepaid credit card to make the initial reservation online, then paid the balance in cash upon arrival. No phone number on file, no emergency contact, no vehicle registered with the parking garage. The email address used for the online booking was a free service account that would likely trace back to a public computer or a compromised network. Dead end after dead end, each one precisely calculated to prevent tracking. Sarah's radio crackled. One of the officers canvassing the floor requested her presence at room 809, 2 doors down. She left Max with Morrison and walked to where the uniformed officer stood outside an open door. Inside, an elderly woman in a hotel bathrobe sat on the edge of her bed, hands clasped in her lap, eyes red from crying. She had heard Sarah's question about anything unusual, and now she wanted to talk. The officer stepped aside as Sarah entered, keeping her voice gentle and patient. The woman's name was Margaret Chen. She was in Atlanta visiting her daughter and had been staying at the Meridian Crown for the past week. Room 809 shared a wall with 807. She had not thought much about her neighbor at first, assuming it was just another guest. But 3 nights ago, she'd woken around 2 in the morning to strange sounds. Not voices, not television. Something mechanical and repetitive, like typing but faster, more intense. It had continued for hours, stopping only as dawn approached. The next night, the same thing. And the night after that. Always between 2 and 6 in the morning. Always that rapid mechanical sound. Sarah asked if she had seen anyone coming or going. Margaret nodded. Once, 2 days ago, she had left her room around noon and noticed the door to 807 opening. A person in dark clothing emerged, face hidden by a cap and sunglasses despite being indoors. They had not looked at her, had not acknowledged her presence at all, just moved to the elevator and vanished. Margaret described the build as average, the height as medium, the clothing as nondescript. The kind of description that matched half the population, but she remembered the feeling it gave her. Cold, impersonal, like being ignored by a machine rather than a person. Sarah thanked Margaret for the information and asked her to provide contact details in case detectives needed to follow up. The elderly woman agreed, though her hands shook as she wrote down her daughter's phone number. Sarah reassured her that the hotel was safe, that officers would remain on the floor throughout the night, that there was no immediate danger. The words felt hollow, even as she spoke them. The danger was not in this building anymore. It was out there, moving through the city, watching from hidden cameras, executing a plan that remained frustratingly obscure. Back in the hallway, Morrison was on his phone, voice tight with controlled frustration. He ended the call as Sarah approached and delivered the news. The laptop's network connection had been severed remotely. Someone had killed the feeds and wiped the cloud storage while the tech team was still trying to trace the connections. Every live camera, every stored file, gone in seconds. All that remained were the physical hard drives and the photographs already collected. Whoever controlled the system had been monitoring the situation, watching as police moved through the room, waiting until the last possible moment to destroy evidence. Sarah felt anger rise hot in her chest. They had been played, lured to this location, allowed to find just enough to understand the scope of the operation, then cut off before they could follow the trail any further. It was calculated, arrogant, a message as clear as the text left on the laptop screen. "You found my workshop," the absence seemed to say, "but you will never find me." The precinct captain arrived an hour before midnight, pulled from his home by the escalating severity of the situation. Captain Richard Hollis was a 30-year veteran with a face that had seen every variation of crime and corruption the city could produce. He listened to Morrison's briefing without interruption, his expression darkening with each new detail. When Morrison finished, Hollis turned to Sarah and asked about Max's reaction. She described it precisely: the refusal to enter, the trembling, the low growl that she had never heard before in 7 years of partnership. Hollis nodded slowly, processing the information. He had worked with K-9 units before, understood that their reactions often provided intelligence that human senses missed. He made the decision quickly. The room would remain sealed, pending full forensic analysis. An FBI liaison would be contacted due to the apparent federal implications of interstate surveillance and possible terrorism connections. The photographs would be cross-referenced with active investigations to determine if any current cases were compromised. And a protection detail would be assigned to officers whose images had been found on the walls. Sarah's name was on that list. So was Morrison's. So was Captain Hollis himself. They were targets or subjects or assets in someone's intelligence operation. The exact nature remained unclear, but the threat was real and present. Sarah thought about her apartment in Virginia Highland, about Max's bed in the corner of her living room, about the routines and routes she followed without thinking, all of it potentially observed, all of it documented. The violation felt personal and intimate in a way that made her skin crawl. The captain dismissed most of the officers, keeping only a skeleton crew to maintain scene security. Morrison would lead the investigation with support from major crimes and federal partners. Sarah and Max were officially assigned to the case as well, providing K-9 support and investigative assistance. The captain made it clear that this was now the department's highest priority. Resources would be allocated, overtime approved. Whatever was necessary to identify Michael Vance and dismantle his surveillance network before it could be weaponized against the city. Sarah left the hotel around 2 in the morning, Max at her side, both of them exhausted but too wired to rest. The rain had stopped, leaving Atlanta's streets slick and reflecting the glow of streetlights and neon signs. She drove through empty intersections, her mind replaying the evening's events, the refusal to enter the room, the wall of photographs, the message on the screen. Each piece was part of a larger puzzle that she could not yet see clearly. Max slept in the back during the drive home, his body finally releasing the tension he had carried for hours. Sarah envied that ability to let go, to trust that the immediate danger had passed. Her own mind refused to quiet, cycling through questions and scenarios. Who was Michael Vance? What was his ultimate goal? Why had he invested so much time and resources into watching Atlanta? Was he acting alone or as part of a larger organization? Each question spawned more questions until the complexity felt overwhelming. Her apartment was dark when she arrived, exactly as she had left it that morning. She checked every room anyway, weapon drawn, Max clearing spaces with practiced efficiency. Nothing was disturbed, no signs of entry or tampering, just her home, ordinary and safe, except now she knew that safety was conditional. Someone had been watching, someone knew where she lived. The thought poisoned the sanctuary she had built here. She fed Max and poured herself a glass of water she did not drink. Sleep seemed impossible, but exhaustion eventually dragged her down to the couch where she sat staring at her phone, scrolling through news feeds and social media, seeing the city through new eyes. Every camera, every lens, every angle became a potential surveillance point. Michael Vance had taught her that Atlanta was not the city she thought she knew. It was a grid of observation points and blind spots. A landscape where privacy was an illusion, maintained only by the fiction that no one was looking. The department called a briefing for 8 in the morning. Sarah arrived early, Max trotting beside her through the precinct corridors, drawing attention from officers who had heard about the hotel incident. News traveled fast in the department, especially news that involved one of their own being targeted. Sarah kept her head down and made her way to the conference room where Morrison and Captain Hollis were already assembling materials. The room filled quickly. Detectives from major crimes, officers from patrol, a tech specialist from the digital forensics lab, an FBI agent whose name Sarah did not catch, but whose presence confirmed the federal interest in the case. Captain Hollis began the briefing by outlining what they knew, which felt frustratingly little despite the hours of work already invested. Michael Vance was a ghost. The name was likely an alias. No matches in criminal databases. No hits on facial recognition from the limited footage they had. The email account had been created from a coffee shop in Portland, Oregon 6 months ago and used only for hotel reservations. The photographs told a more revealing story. Forensic analysis of the paper, stock and ink suggested they had been printed on a commercial-grade photo printer over the course of several months. Some images showed seasonal variations, indicating long-term surveillance. The subjects included 23 police officers, 8 city officials, 12 business leaders, and approximately 40 civilians whose connections to each other were still being determined. Cross-referencing with active investigations revealed that several subjects were involved in cases related to corruption, money laundering, and organized crime. Morrison took over, detailing the technical findings. The hard drives recovered from the hotel room contained encrypted files that would take days or weeks to crack. The surveillance feeds had been sophisticated, using commercial security cameras that had been hacked and repurposed. Some were positioned on public buildings, others on private businesses. All had been compromised without the owner's knowledge. The network had covered major intersections, government buildings, police facilities, and residential neighborhoods across Atlanta. Whoever built it had created a panopticon, a system that could track movements and associations across the entire city. The FBI agent spoke next, voice carrying the measured authority of someone accustomed to briefing rooms like this. The Bureau was opening a joint investigation with Atlanta PD, focusing on potential terrorism connections and interstate criminal activity. Similar surveillance networks had been detected in other cities over the past 2 years, though none as extensive as Atlanta's. The working theory was that Michael Vance was part of a larger organization, possibly foreign intelligence or a sophisticated criminal syndicate. The goal could be espionage, blackmail, or preparation for a major attack. All options remained on the table. Sarah listened to the briefing and felt the scope of the situation, expanding beyond anything she had anticipated. This was not a lone operator in a hotel room. This was infrastructure. This was planning on a scale that required resources and expertise far beyond what a single individual could manage. Michael Vance was a face, perhaps not even a real one, for something much larger and more dangerous. The captain assigned tasks. Morrison would coordinate with the FBI on tracing financial connections and identifying other potential surveillance sites. The tech team would continue working on decrypting the hard drives. Patrol would increase visibility around locations that had been photographed, and Sarah would work with Max to follow any physical evidence that could lead to Michael Vance's current location. The Belgian Malinois had proven his value at the hotel. Now they needed him to do what he did best: track. The briefing ended with the captain's reminder that this investigation was classified until further notice. No media, no leaks. The last thing they needed was public panic or a suspect who knew exactly how close they were to being identified. Sarah agreed with the logic, but hated the secrecy. The people being watched deserved to know. The civilians whose faces had been pinned to that wall deserved to be warned. But operational security demanded silence, so silence it would be. She took Max to the evidence room, where items from the hotel had been catalogued and stored. The duffel bag from the closet sat on a metal shelf, tagged and sealed. Sarah requested access, and a tech brought it to an examination table. She opened it carefully, letting Max sniff the contents. Clothing in dark colors, generic brands with tags removed. A toiletry kit with basic items, no electronics, no documents, no identifying information. But Max paused at a black t-shirt, nose working the fabric with interest. Sarah bagged it separately and logged it as a scent article. They moved to the parking garage beneath the hotel, escorted by 2 officers and a detective who had been assigned to retrace Michael Vance's movements. Security footage showed the suspect exiting through a door that led directly to the garage's lower level. Max was given the scent article and released to track. He moved immediately, nose to the ground, following an invisible trail through rows of parked vehicles. The trail led to the garage's exit ramp, up to street level, then stopped at a curb where tire marks suggested a vehicle had been parked. Morrison arrived with a traffic camera, still image, showing a dark sedan leaving the area around the time Michael Vance would have exited the hotel. The license plate was obscured by what appeared to be deliberate mud splatter, a simple but effective method of avoiding automated readers. Make and model were generic enough that thousands of similar vehicles operated in Atlanta on any given day. Another dead end, but at least they had confirmation that Vance had escaped by car and not on foot. Sarah spent the rest of the day working with Max to establish scent articles and potential tracking routes. They returned to the hotel room where Max's refusal to enter remained absolute. Whatever he had detected, whatever had triggered his alarm, was still present in that space. Sarah respected his judgment and did not force the issue. Instead, she focused on adjacent rooms, hallways, and common areas, building a scent map that might reveal patterns or connections they had missed. By evening, exhaustion had caught up with both of them. Sarah drove home through rush-hour traffic, her mind still processing the day's discoveries. The investigation was moving forward, but every answer spawned new questions. Who was Michael Vance working for? What was the ultimate goal of the surveillance network? Why had he abandoned the hotel operation when he did? The message on the laptop screen haunted her. You arrived too early. Early for what? The answer began to emerge 3 days later when Detective Morrison called her at 6 in the morning. His voice carried the urgency of someone who had not slept. The tech team had cracked one of the encrypted drives. What they found changed everything. The files contained detailed plans for a coordinated attack on multiple locations across Atlanta, government buildings, financial centers, critical infrastructure. The surveillance had not been about blackmail or espionage, it had been about planning. Sarah met Morrison at the precinct within 30 minutes. The conference room was already full. FBI agents and local detectives crowding around a screen that displayed the recovered documents. Diagrams showed building layouts, security protocols, and personnel schedules. Photographs identified key targets and vulnerabilities. Timelines outlined a sequence of events designed to maximize chaos and casualties. The attack was planned for 2 weeks from now, timed to coincide with a major political event that would bring state and federal officials to the city. Captain Hollis addressed the room with controlled intensity. They had 2 weeks to identify the entire network, locate Michael Vance and any associates, and prevent an attack that could kill hundreds. Resources were being mobilized from every available source. The FBI was bringing in additional agents. The mayor's office had been briefed and was coordinating with state authorities. This was no longer just an investigation. It was a counter-terrorism operation. Sarah's role expanded immediately. Max's tracking abilities made him invaluable for following leads that electronic surveillance could not. She was assigned to work directly with a joint task force that would focus on physical evidence and suspect locations. Morrison would handle the digital side, coordinating with techs and analysts. The captain would manage the political and administrative pressures that came with an operation this size. The next 10 days became a blur of activity. Sarah and Max worked 18-hour shifts, following leads across the city. They tracked scent trails from suspected safe houses. They cleared buildings flagged by analysis of the surveillance photographs. They provided security sweeps for locations identified as potential targets. Max performed flawlessly, his training and instincts proving critical in situations where human senses were insufficient. The investigation uncovered a network larger than anyone had anticipated. Michael Vance was not a lone operator. He was a logistics coordinator for a cell that included at least 6 other individuals, each with specialized skills. One was a former military explosives expert. Another had worked in IT security for a major corporation. A third had ties to overseas extremist groups. The surveillance network had been their reconnaissance tool, allowing them to plan an attack with precision that would have been impossible without inside knowledge. 3 suspects were identified and arrested in coordinated raids across the metro area. Each had been living under false identities, working ordinary jobs, blending into communities while planning mass murder. The arrests yielded evidence that confirmed the attack timeline and provided details about weapon caches and assembly points. But Michael Vance remained at large. He had gone to ground after abandoning the hotel room, and despite the best efforts of local and federal law enforcement, his location remained unknown. With 1 week remaining before the planned attack date, the task force shifted strategy. Instead of only hunting Michael Vance, they would harden all potential targets, increase security at the political event, and set traps at locations identified in the recovered files. The goal was to disrupt the attack, even if they could not capture every participant. Sarah agreed with the approach, but hated the reactive posture. Somewhere out there, Michael Vance was adapting his plans, adjusting to the arrests, preparing to execute whatever portion of the attack remained viable. 4 days before the event, a break came from an unexpected source. One of the arrested suspects, facing terrorism charges and mandatory life sentences, agreed to cooperate in exchange for consideration. He provided an address for a warehouse on the outskirts of Atlanta that Michael Vance had rented under another alias. The location was not in any of the recovered files, suggesting it was a contingency site, a backup base in case the primary operation was compromised. The task force mobilized immediately. Sarah and Max joined a tactical team for the raid, rolling out before dawn in a convoy of unmarked vehicles. The warehouse district was industrial and isolated, perfect for activities that required privacy and space. The target building was a mid-sized structure with minimal windows and a single entry point facing a loading dock. Surveillance from a distance showed no obvious activity, but heat signatures suggested someone was inside. The entry was textbook: flashbangs, shouted commands, tactical officers flowing through the space with weapons raised. Sarah and Max followed, holding back until the initial sweep confirmed no immediate threats. Inside, the warehouse had been converted into a workshop. Tables held partially assembled devices that explosives techs immediately identified as improvised bombs. Chemicals were stored in industrial drums. Plans and diagrams covered whiteboards mounted on the walls, but Michael Vance was not there. The workshop was active, materials fresh, but the occupant had left recently. Max picked up the scent immediately, tracking it to a rear exit that opened onto an alley. The trail led to tire marks where a vehicle had been parked. Sarah's frustration peaked. They were hours behind, maybe less, but it was enough for Vance to escape again. The man was a professional, trained in evasion and counter-surveillance, staying one step ahead through preparation and paranoia. The workshop yielded critical intelligence despite Vance's absence. The devices being assembled were sophisticated, designed to defeat standard bomb detection methods. The target list had been updated to reflect changes made necessary by the arrests, and a laptop left behind in the rush to evacuate, contained communications with an overseas contact who provided funding and ideological support. The FBI took immediate custody of the laptop and began tracing the international connections. With 72 hours remaining before the political event, the task force implemented full lockdown protocols. The venue where officials would gather was swept repeatedly by bomb dogs and technical teams. Access was restricted to credentialed personnel who had been thoroughly vetted. Security checkpoints were established in concentric rings around the location. Counter-sniper teams took positions on nearby buildings. The message was clear. If Michael Vance wanted to execute his attack, he would have to go through the most heavily fortified security perimeter Atlanta had ever assembled. Sarah and Max were assigned to roving patrol, covering areas between checkpoints and responding to any alerts. The day of the event arrived with cloudless skies and temperatures climbing into the 80s. Crowds gathered outside the secure perimeter, protesters and supporters mixing in groups monitored by uniformed officers. Media trucks lined the streets, satellite dishes pointing skyward, reporters doing stand-ups with the venue as backdrop. It was organized chaos, the kind of environment where threats could hide in plain sight. Hours passed without incident. The event proceeded inside the venue. Politicians gave speeches. Officials conducted meetings. Security teams maintained vigilance, but tensions slowly gave way to cautious optimism. Maybe the arrests and security measures had been enough. Maybe Michael Vance had recognized the impossibility of success and abandoned the plan. Maybe they had won without ever firing a shot. Then Max alerted. They were 2 blocks from the venue, walking a route they had covered 3 times already, when the Belgian Malinois stopped abruptly and turned toward a parking structure. His body language shifted to full alert, muscles coiled, attention fixed on something Sarah could not see. She radioed the alert and moved toward the structure with Max leading. The entrance was supposed to be closed, vehicle access blocked for the duration of the event. But the barrier gate stood open, lock cut, and fresh tire tracks marked the pavement. Tactical units converged on the location as Sarah and Max entered the structure. They moved up the ramps, clearing levels, Max tracking ascent that grew stronger with each floor. On the 4th level, they found the vehicle, a dark sedan, windows tinted, parked in a corner spot with a direct line of sight to the venue 2 blocks away. Sarah approached carefully, weapon drawn, Max beside her. The vehicle was empty, no visible occupants, but the trunk was partially open. She called for the bomb squad and pulled back to a safe distance. The techs arrived within minutes, their equipment and robot deployed to examine the vehicle remotely. What they found confirmed Sarah's worst fears. The trunk contained a vehicle-borne, improvised explosive device, enough material to level multiple buildings. The device was armed but not yet activated, waiting for a signal that would never come now that it had been discovered. While the bomb squad worked to render the device safe, tactical teams spread through the parking structure searching for Michael Vance. Max tracked the scent to a stairwell that led to the roof. Sarah and 3 officers followed, climbing quickly, weapons ready. The roof access door stood open. They emerged into bright sunlight and found Michael Vance sitting on the edge of the building, legs dangling over empty space, hands visible and empty. He turned as they approached, his face finally visible without hat or sunglasses. Younger than Sarah expected, maybe early 30s, with the kind of forgettable features that made him perfect for covert work. He smiled, a cold expression that held no warmth or humor. The game was over and he knew it, but he had come closer to success than anyone would admit publicly. The surveillance, the planning, the execution, all of it had been professional and precise. Only luck and a K-9's instinct had prevented catastrophe. Officers moved in to secure him, reading rights and applying restraints. Michael Vance did not resist. He allowed himself to be led away, still smiling, as if the arrest was just another phase in a longer operation. Sarah watched him go and felt no satisfaction. They had stopped the attack, yes, but the network he represented was still out there. other cells, other plans, other cities. The surveillance in Atlanta had been one small piece of a much larger puzzle. The device was rendered safe. The venue was swept again as a precaution. The political event concluded without the attendees ever knowing how close they had come to disaster. Captain Hollis briefed the mayor and federal officials, and within hours, sanitized versions of the story began to leak to media. Terrorist plot foiled. Suspects in custody. Vigilant law enforcement saves lives. The headlines told the simple version that the public needed to hear, but Sarah knew the truth was more complex. Michael Vance had been caught, but the ideology and network that created him remained. The surveillance systems he had built could be replicated elsewhere. The plans he had drawn could be adapted and improved. This victory was real but temporary. A single battle in a conflict that would continue long after the cameras moved on to other stories. She took Max home that night and sat on her apartment floor with him, running her hands through his fur, grateful for his instincts and his partnership. He had known something was wrong in that hotel room. He had refused to enter, trusting his senses over training or commands. That refusal had saved lives, had provided the warning that allowed them to disrupt the entire operation before it could succeed. 3 weeks later, Sarah attended a ceremony at City Hall where Max was awarded a commendation for his service. The mayor spoke about bravery and dedication. Captain Hollis presented the medal, a small metal badge that Max would never wear, but that represented recognition from a city that owed him a debt they could not fully comprehend. Sarah accepted it on his behalf, keeping her remarks brief. Max had simply done what he was trained to do. The fact that it saved hundreds of lives was a bonus, not the goal. The investigation continued. The FBI's International Division traced Michael Vance's funding to a network operating across 3 continents. More arrests followed. More plots were disrupted. The surveillance systems in other cities were identified and dismantled. The work would continue for years, maybe decades, as law enforcement adapted to threats that evolved faster than policy or procedure could anticipate. For Sarah and Max, life returned to something approaching normal. Patrol shifts, training sessions, calls that ranged from mundane to dangerous. The hotel room remained a landmark in her memory. A reminder that threats often announce themselves in ways that only instinct could detect. Max had heard something that night, sensed something, recognized danger in a form that bypassed rational analysis and went straight to the primal core that kept animals alive in hostile environments. She trusted that instinct now more than ever. When Max alerted, she listened. When he refused, she respected the refusal. Because in a world where surveillance could be weaponized and strangers could plan mass murder from anonymous hotel rooms, the oldest form of intelligence gathering remained the most reliable. The bond between officer and K-9, the partnership between human reason and animal instinct, the silent communication that needed no words because it operated on frequencies deeper than language. Atlanta rebuilt. The scars from the investigation faded as the city moved forward, but Sarah remembered. She remembered the wall of photographs and the feeds showing live surveillance. She remembered the message on the laptop screen. She remembered the moment when Max refused to cross the threshold into room 807, and how that refusal had been the first warning of something that could have destroyed lives and shattered the city's sense of security. In the end, it was not technology or procedure that saved Atlanta. It was instinct. It was partnership. It was a Belgian Malinois who trusted his senses more than orders, and a lieutenant who trusted him enough to follow that lead. The silence that fell over the 8th floor that night was not just the absence of sound. It was the presence of something profound. The recognition that safety is fragile and threats are patient, and the difference between disaster and survival sometimes comes down to a dog who refuses to enter a room.